We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse's Phil Brasher, as well as this week by South Dakota Republican Dusty Johnson. And Congressman Johnson, we appreciate you joining us.
Of course, anytime.
For starters, I want to talk a little bit about the Biden administration's 30 by 30 initiative that they rolled out today. This is something we've been hearing about for a little while, dating back to a January executive order. Today, we learned that in administration press releases from here on out, it's going to be officially dubbed the America the Beautiful initiative, and some additional context provided today, but still some unanswered questions. And so I guess my first question for you, Congressman, is based on what we know now, what the administration has rolled out today, and seemingly the effort that they're going to place on voluntary measures, your thoughts on this 30 by 30 package and where you think agriculture might overlap with it?
Well, I mean, I'm willing to give the president and his team the benefit of the doubt. Of course, I believe they're well-intentioned, but this is the wrong approach. We all want to be good stewards of the environment, but locking up 30% of this country's land in the next decade, in essence, to just idle it, is not the right approach. I mean, we know what works. And your question, Spencer, about is there a role for American agriculture? Of course there is. We see both on the working lands perspective from CSP and from EQIP, the unbelievable environmental benefits that those programs have provided. We also see in ag lands and other programs like CRP, those can be designed in a way that don't take land permanently out of production, but that use it to improve soil health, cut down on erosion, help with habitat. I mean, we have all of the tools we need to be able to manage land properly in this country. We already have 12% of the land mass in this country owned by the federal government, but we do not need to go from 12% to 30%.
Congressman, the administration and Agricultural Secretary Tom Vilsack say that in this plan see a key role, major role for working ag lands as part of this and doing conservation on those lands. Secretary Vilsack said that that's going to require more funding for conservation programs. Can Republicans in the House get on board with a significant increase in spending for conservation programs? Do you think it's needed?
Well, I think, I don't want to say the devil's in the details because I don't want to insinuate conservation has anything to do with the devil, right? I mean, these can be incredibly powerful programs. And I think in the past, you have seen some bipartisan support with conservation. And again, it kind of depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking working lands or you're talking like a CRP program. And we've seen those acres of CRP come up and down in recent farm bills. It's always one of the bigger debates of the farm bill. What's the right CRP acre number? And so, of course, when Vilsack is talking, I understand what he gets. I mean, I don't think Tom Vilsack is going to be the biggest enemy to American ag producers here. I mean, I think there will be plenty of times where he is fighting an internal battle. He and I don't agree on everything, but I think he clearly understands the role that agriculture has to play in this mission. I'm a little more concerned about some of his other colleagues in the administration.
Also this week, the Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance, this big coalition of farm groups across the country, came out with some recommendations for a USDA-run carbon bank, mostly focused on doing pilot projects for paying farmers and helping them get ready for carbon credit markets. Is this something Republicans over in the House? There's been a lot of criticism on the Republicans in the Senate, certainly. How do you view that in the House, the concept of carbon bank?
Well, I'm hearing the same thing in the House on the Republican side as I hear out in the country. when I'm traveling South Dakota, and that is there is some intrigue, there's some interest, but there's also a lot of skepticism. I think, and last time I talked to Secretary Vilsack about a carbon bank, I said this, Mr. Secretary, if your interest is in really dealing with carbon and in providing a new revenue stream for American producers, you might well be able to get a broad swath of the American agricultural industry behind you. But if we're trying to do a bunch of other environmental or land control or racial equity things as a part of this program, you are going to lose the country, and in a hurry. So I think, at the Ag Committee, when we had Zippy Duvall a couple of months ago, this was my primary line of questioning. Gosh, Zippy, you've talked favorably about the possibility of a carbon bank, but there is so much we don't know. And of course, Duvall and I agreed on that. There's a lot we don't know. And so I think there's kind of a wait and see, a healthy skepticism right now, but I don't think there's a lot of daylight between where congressional Republicans are and your typical ag producer is. I think they're singing off the same sheet of music.
I'm going to shift to infrastructure for a second. You're on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. The administration is obviously trying to put together a package in the next few weeks that the House and Senate can consider this summer. Is there any room for a compromise here? Are Republicans in the House going to negotiate with Democrats? And if so, what are your priorities?
Well, of course, there's room for compromise. And of course, there have already been a group of Republicans who've introduced a counter proposal. I've been pretty disappointed that the president hasn't countered their counter. This is what happened with the COVID package too, right? The president put out a $2 trillion plan. Susan Collins and 9 other Republicans in the Senate brought Joe Biden his 60th vote for a compromise package. And I think it was somewhere short of $700 billion. And I know that wasn't as much as the president wanted, but we all understand the dance here, right? I put out an offer, you counter. If I'm serious, I counter again. And we kind of negotiate along the way here. The fact that the negotiations stop with the president and that he didn't counter the Collins plan, I thought was a terrible disappointment. Because every previous COVID package had been done in a bipartisan way. And the same thing is true with regard to infrastructure. Every single highway bill in the history of this country that has been enacted into law has been put together by Democrats, Republicans working together. That's not how the president's plan came together. He introduced it on his own. He didn't consult a single Republican when he did it. I do think there's room to compromise, but we've got to get back to a point where we are willing to focus on infrastructure. I don't want to say that daycare is not important. It is, but I think it makes it a lot harder to get an agreement when we are trying to pay for daycare with transportation dollars. And I would say this by way of outro on this topic. The last 5-year highway bill was $305 billion over 5 years. It was heralded as a big bipartisan compromise. Like it was a big success, the FAST Act. Well, this isn't $305 billion. It's 7 times that, but it only has $115 billion for roads and bridges. And anybody in ag country understands the value of ports, understands the value of roads and of bridges. This is how we get our products to market. Let's focus on that.
Congressman, I couldn't let you go without chatting a little bit with you about some beef legislation. I know it's an issue near and dear to your heart, but also in the grand scheme of figuring out some pricing and price transparency on that subject. We've seen Senators Fisher and Grassley introduce some legislation as well. But when I talked to you and some others on this subject last year, folks were kind of thinking that need to pass something in 21 and then refine it for the 23 Farm Bill. But as you look at, some of the infrastructure issues, completing the recovery from COVID-19, some of the quote unquote social infrastructure issues the administration is pushing, is there room on the congressional agenda for some kind of beef pricing transparency legislation to make its way across Capitol Hill here in 2021?
Well, we should absolutely be doing something on livestock. And I don't have any problem with doing something on transparency. I've got a number of bills, as you know, that would deal with transparency, things like making a beef contract library available. Transparency is not a silver bullet. And so I hope we go beyond that. I don't know that we're going to get that done this year, but we really should. The reality is prices on the hoof are terrible, but we know the problem. I mean, you go down in Texas, there are regions within Texas, micro regions, where you might only have 7 or 8 or 10% cash trade, very poor transparency. You move further north, you might get areas around a sale barn in South Dakota or North Dakota where you get 40%. But you don't see a lot better price. It's not like the people in South Dakota are talking about what great prices they have because they have better transparency than the South does. And so this whole idea, I mean, so often I think we make this more complicated than we should. Is transparency a good thing? Yes, of course. But transparency is not a silver bullet. And we don't have a lot of data that indicates that transparency in and of itself puts upward pressure on price. The problem is we don't have enough processors and we don't have enough processing capacity. It comes down to shackle space. And until we get the fortitude to actually deal with that, we are just playing around the margins trying to treat the symptoms. So my price act, which I introduced last Congress and we're going to reintroduce this Congress, actually deals with the root problem and tries to put more resources to bear on increasing the amount of processing capacity we have outside the big four. That's what's going to make a real impact. Transparency sometimes can be a distraction from the real issue.
Mm-hmm. So from the outside looking in, kind of a light schedule in Congress this week, but that does not mean that there's not a lot of things going on to keep people's attention, and would encourage all of you to stop by agripulse.com and check in on our coverage of things like 30 by 30, like infrastructure, like some proposed tax changes. A lot of things going on right now that will impact farmers and ranchers for quite a while to come. And a lot of things certainly on the agenda at the moment. And Congressman Johnson, we appreciate you stopping by and joining us to discuss them.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thanks.
For Congressman Dusty Johnson and Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.